Hi, welcome to episode 15 of Got a Story for You. I'm Phil Giunta, and with temperatures rising and summer just a day away, we're headed back to the beach, specifically Rehoboth Beach, Delaware, just as we did in episode 10 when I read my story Tower 16 from the Beach Nights anthology by Cat and Mouse Press. This time I'm going to read from another Cat and Mouse Press anthology, this one called Beach Pulp. And as you can tell by the title and the marvelous cover art by Joe Palumbo, this anthology is an homage to the classic pulp magazines like Amazing Stories and Black Mask, Weird Tales, and so many others. In this anthology, I actually have two stories, and the one I'm going to read today is called The Celestials. And in this story, siblings Rodney and Laurel Jaggar visit Rehoboth Beach to attend the funeral of their reclusive sister and famous writer, Celeste. And while there, Laurel and Rodney meet a group of Celeste's closest friends, whose life stories are stranger than fiction. I hope you enjoy The Celestials. At Parcell Funeral Home in the quaint coastal town of Lewis, Delaware, Laurel and Rodney Jaggar stood beside their sister's closed casket, shaking hands with a seemingly interminable line of complete strangers. Laurel was astonished that their reclusive sister Celeste had made so many friends since moving to nearby Rehoboth Beach 8 years ago. It was only after the first dozen mourners expressed their condolences with such phrases as, "I loved your sister's novels," and "I met Celeste at a book signing at Browseabout," that Laurel understood the truth. These people were not friends, but fans. They knew Celeste only through her work and occasional public appearances. Nevertheless, their well-intentioned sympathies left Laurel with a bitter sting of guilt. Neither she nor her brother had ever read a single one of Celeste's books. As shame compounded her grief, Laurel wiped away another stream of tears and accepted the fact that these people probably knew Celeste better than her own family did. She shot a sidelong glance at the casket and closed her eyes, trying to erase the image of Celeste's battered body. Somewhere else in Delaware, the drunk driver who had taken her life was also being laid to rest. Another loyal reader clutched Laurel's hand, muttered the standard cliché, and stepped aside. Will this never end? She sighed in relief as the last 5 people in line approached together, led by a distinguished elderly gentleman with salt and pepper hair. He extended a hand and introduced himself as Rusty Dickinson. "I can't tell you what an honor it is to meet you both. I only wish it were under brighter circumstances. I know the past 5 days have been difficult for you, but we just want you to know that we owe a special debt of gratitude to Celeste. She helped each of us in ways no one else could, which is why we volunteered to be pallbearers." Rodney exchanged a wary glance with Laurel. "Well, much obliged." Rusty stepped aside and gestured to the others. The first was a tall, lean young man who introduced himself as Christian Bayard. As they shook hands, Laurel couldn't help but take note of his unblemished bronze complexion and square jaw. By contrast, Virginia Kent was a full-figured teen with a leonine mane of raven hair that framed a sun-deprived face and complemented everything from her ebony matte lipstick to her one-piece black dress and thigh-high leather boots. There was no way in hell our Celeste hung out with this chick. Laurel could tell by Rodney's forced smile that he was equally as disconcerted by the girl's appearance. "She looks like something that crawled out of the cabinet of Dr. Caligari." Bringing up the rear was a nondescript middle-aged couple who introduced themselves as Dutch Draper and Carla Dodd. Doleful eyes belied their warm smiles as each engulfed Laurel and Rod in a firm embrace. Laurel found herself wondering how such a motley group had ever come to know one another, let alone someone as reticent as Celeste. As if sensing her bewilderment, Rusty leaned close with a reassuring smile. "You'll understand everything soon enough." The service was held at the Solid Ground non-denominational church, where each of Celeste's friends delivered a brief, touching eulogy. Virginia was the first to speak, addressing Laurel and Rod directly. "I want you to know how much Celeste helped me. I've struggled with depression since I was really young, but I started using X and other drugs after my family turned their backs on me when I came out. Thanks to your sister, I've been clean now for 4 years. I have an awesome job, an apartment here in Lewis, and a new family that cares about me. None of that would have happened without Celeste. With a lopsided smile, Virginia wiped her eyes and stepped away. Christian followed, recounting how Celeste had helped him overcome his fear of the ocean after the drowning death of his mother when he was a child. Then Dutch and Carla took the lectern together and credited Celeste with helping reunite them after they'd lost touch nearly 3 decades ago. Finally, Rusty Dickinson imparted a tale that left Rod stunned and Laurel in tears. The murder of his wife 6 years ago had launched him on a downward spiral into alcoholism. Then a series of financial misfortunes left Rusty broke, homeless, and on the verge of suicide. But with your sister's help, I found the hope and strength to take control of my life. I think it's fair to say that Celeste saved me. He paused, spreading his arms to indicate the others from his group. She saved us all. By the time they arrived at Henlopen Memorial Park, the morning clouds had dispersed. Beneath an unblemished September sky, Rod and Laurel placed a teardrop-shaped bouquet of white pom-poms and lilies atop Celeste's casket, while the others stood at a respectful distance. She deserved better from us, Laurel whispered. We were the only family she had left, and we had nothing to say at her service. She turned and stormed off toward Rusty and his group. I'd like to know more about our sister and how she helped all of you. Rusty nodded. Well, no better time than the present. Have you eaten today? Come to think of it, no. Let's do something about that. I'm hosting a reception later at my house on Delaware Avenue, not too far from Celeste's place. We'd be honored if you and Rod would join us. As Celeste's sole heirs, Rodney and Laurel had inherited her house on Sandalwood Street in Rehoboth Beach, and were staying there for the week while they decided what to do with it. After freshening up, they walked the half-mile to Rusty's place and were still discussing their options when they arrived. You should rent it out, Rusty advised as he poured drinks. You can make a hell of a profit, pay off the mortgage, and have a vacation home when you need it. If you don't like the summer crowd, Rehoboth is open all year round. You should come here at Christmas. It's beautiful. Rod shrugged. I ain't much for the beach, but Laurel loves it. He nudged her with his elbow. Maybe you'll finally find that rich husband you've been looking for. She narrowed her eyes at him before addressing Rusty. You said that our sister saved your lives, personally or through her writing? Rusty handed her a drink. Both, my dear. I only wish I could have returned the favor. He addressed the others and raised his glass. To Celeste! May her words last forever. Around the table, everyone repeated the sentiment as they clinked their glasses together. Rusty pointed to Rod and Laurel. I take it that you haven't read too many of your sister's books. Rod shook his head. Well, we read some of her short stories when she started writing in high school, but after our parents died, we kind of drifted apart. You know how it is. Rusty held up a hand. Say no more. I'll tell you what. If you want to know exactly what Celeste did for us, you should read her Sands of Time series. 4 books, all short novels, easy reading. You can blast through one in a night or two. The longest one is about 175 pages. I have a spare set. It's all yours. That way, you get the whole picture, and in Celeste's own words. Which one did you read? At the royal treat for breakfast the following morning, Rod and Laurel placed their orders before delving into a discussion about their sister's novels. Beneath the surface, it was about Christian Bayard. I wonder if he signed a release form because Celeste didn't even change his name. It had me in tears. After his mother drowned when he was 5, Christian was passed around from one family member to the next, and some of them were horribly abusive. He ran away when he was 14 after one of his uncles doused him in gasoline, tried to light him on fire. Christian jumped into a bay up in Maine and swam for miles to get away. The rest of the book is a pretty wild ride until he got to Rehoboth to become a lifeguard and scuba instructor. Yeah, well, you should read The Pressure at this depth. It's about Rusty Dickinson. Just like he said at the funeral, The guy had an idyllic life until his wife was shot during a convenience store holdup in Chicago. Then he started drinking, lost his job, his house, everything. He almost committed suicide before ending up in Rehoboth and turning his life around. I ain't much of a reader, but that book kept me up all night. I can't wait to dive into the next one. Yeah, well, I get the feeling they all end up with the main characters coming to Rehoboth. Still, you have to admit, Celeste turned out to be an amazing writer. She came a long way from her early stuff. We really should have read her books while she was alive. We should have been more supportive after Mom and Dad died. Instead, we let her down. Did we ever once come to see her after she moved here? She invited us a few times, but it took her death to get us here. I know. I feel lousy about that, but to be honest, I never knew how to relate to her. Celeste was just different. She was always so damn aloof and withdrawn. It always made things awkward. At least we sent birthday and Christmas cards every year. That isn't the same. The waiter brought their food, and they ate in silence. Afterward, Rod picked up the check. As they left the royal treat, he pointed toward the boardwalk. Take the scenic route? Laurel nodded, and they started up Wilmington Avenue. I just find all this hard to believe. She and Rod both slipped off their shoes and started down the ramp onto a beach teeming with activity. I mean, what could make someone as private as Celeste involve herself with all these troubled people? They said she helped them through their problems. But how? Clearly they inspired her books, but was she just a shoulder to cry on? Did she lend them money? Did she put them up at her house until they got back on their feet? I can't imagine her doing any of that. Rod glanced over at a group of lifeguards gathered near the water, all wearing the red swimsuits of the Rehoboth Beach Patrol. But I think I see someone who can answer your questions. Ain't that Christian right there? The one who just tossed his bag beside the lifeguard chair? Laurel shaded her eyes and followed Rod's gaze to an attractively tanned and perfectly toned young man who shucked off his white t-shirt and dropped it into his bag. Oh, if I were only 15 years younger. Once he slipped off his sunglasses, she recognized the face. Yep, that's him. As they approached, Christian looked up and waved, almost as if he expected them. Hi again. Sorry to bother you. The lifeguard shrugged. Oh, it's no bother. My shift doesn't start for another 10 minutes. It's good to see you again. How do you like Rehoboth? Oh, love it so far, Laurel replied, before asking him to elaborate on what he'd said in his eulogy about Celeste. Well, your sister literally wrote my life story. Same goes for all the others. So what you read in the books is exactly how she helped us. Laurel started to reply, but Rod cut her off. Sorry, if I'm a little dense here, but so the only thing Celeste did was write about your lives, and that was all you needed to find direction? We were under the impression that maybe she gave you money or a place to stay. Not exactly. Christian held up a hand. But if you two are free tonight around 7, we're having a small memorial for your sister at Rusty's house. You're more than welcome to join us. All of your questions will be answered. They arrived a few minutes late. Rusty offered them several choices of beverage, and Christian volunteered to play bartender. As he made his way back toward the kitchen, the others engaged Rod and Laurel in idle conversation about their stay in Rehoboth. Laurel marveled at Virginia Kent's intricate sleeve of tattoos revealed by her black tank top, while the reunited couple, Dutch Draper and Carla Dodd, once again stood with their arms around each other, as if joined at the hip. Christian returned with their drinks, and Rod and Laurel took seats on the sofa. So, following up on our conversation on the beach earlier, Christian began, when I said that your sister literally wrote my life story, I meant that your sister gave me my life story. He gestured toward the others. She gave life to all of us, which is why we call ourselves the Celestials. Rod and Laurel exchanged puzzled glances. Let me explain. Rusty rose from his easy chair and began pacing the room as he spoke. Your sister believed that when a writer creates characters with depth and fully developed backgrounds, and all the flaws and foibles that make one human, those characters come to life in some other world or dimension. And we came to life here, Virginia added. Here, Laurel repeated. In Rehoboth. Rod laughed at Laurel's earnest bewilderment. Okay, We'll play along. So you're saying that our sister created all of you simply by writing you as characters in her books? Rusty smiled and pointed at Rod. Give that man a cigar. Well, that's impossible. Laurel shook her head. Worse, it's insane. Unless you're God, no one can just create people out of nothing. If Celeste imagined all of you into existence, how could you get by without birth certificates or social security cards? Rusty held up a hand. Celeste didn't create us from nothing. She created us from her beautiful and fertile imagination, as well as her desperate loneliness. As for the rest, I'll get to that shortly. He stood beside Christian as he continued. I'm not sure if you had much chance to explore the town, but just up the road, there are intersecting streets named Christian and Bayard. He gestured to the others in turn as he continued. On the north end of town, we have Virginia Avenue and Kent Street. Over by the bay, Dutch Road and Draper Drive, and Carla and Dodd Avenues. As for me, the Rusty Rudder restaurant is on Dickinson Street in Dewey Beach. Celeste was a brilliant storyteller, but she didn't work too hard at naming her characters. Light laughter went around the room as Rusty took a seat on the sofa beside a noticeably trembling Laurel. She shifted closer to her brother as Rusty looked from her to Rod. The real reason you fell out of touch with Celeste was that she became angry when you both moved away after your parents died. She felt abandoned, and that put a strain on your relationship with her, isn't that right? Rod shifted forward in his seat. Laurel knew he wanted nothing more than to escape, but a strange melange of curiosity and fear kept her riveted. Well, she pleaded with us to stay, but we had lives of our own to... We don't owe these people an explanation. Rod took Laurel's hand and gave it a squeeze. What happened in our family is none of their business. Let's get out of here. He stood, but Laurel's legs refused to budge. I understand how you feel. Rusty glanced over at the others before shifting in his seat. If you'll just indulge me for another minute. He turned toward the nearest end table and opened a drawer. First, he retrieved a pair of white cotton gloves. After donning them, he reached in again and produced a clear acrylic case containing a paperback book in pristine condition. With a gentle push, Rusty slid aside the top of the case. Not long after your parents died, Celeste finished her first novel. As if handling the holiest of relics, Rusty held up the book using both hands. It was titled While We're Young. Frequently, new authors will write themselves into their stories as the protagonist, under a different name, of course. This is one of those occasions. Celeste used some cheap vanity press to publish this. She sold a few hundred copies at most, but never did a second print run. It's mostly forgotten now. Rusty turned the book over and presented it to Laurel and Rod. Note the main character's siblings mentioned in the back cover blurb. With mounting dread, Laurel leaned forward, but she knew what to expect even before she read the names. Rodney and Laurel. Rod shrugged. Okay, so Celeste named some characters after us. So what? She did not create us. We're flesh and blood human beings. No one is contesting that. But did you happen to read the About the Author page in any of your sister's books? It mentions that Celeste was one of 3 children. Would you like to hear her bio from her first novel? Rusty turned to the final page and read aloud. Originally from Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, Celeste Jaggar was the only child of 2 incredibly busy parents. At a very early age, Celeste found companionship in such literary characters as Sherlock Holmes, The Three Musketeers, and Isaac Asimov's Lucky Star. Rusty lowered the book and his voice as he looked from Rod to Laurel. Celeste's ability to alter her reality didn't manifest until she began writing. As her storytelling skills improved, so too did her power. It wasn't long before she was not only altering her own reality, but that of the world at large. But I remember my life, all of it. Wouldn't there be gaps in my memory if I was just a product of Celeste's imagination? What were you doing on this day 5 years ago? I don't know, probably working. So there are gaps in your memory. Hardly anyone remembers every single day of his or her life. We remember significant conversations, events, achievements, relationships, In other words, fragments. And those were provided to us by Celeste. Now, to answer your earlier question about identification, Rusty lifted his wallet from the coffee table. Opening it, he produced a series of cards and laid them out as he spoke. Social Security, driver's license, medical insurance, hell, even my library card. All of these things came into existence when we did. Celeste was nothing if not thorough. So this brings us back to the two of you. While Celeste was writing her first novel, she lived in Pennsylvania but was already spending her summer vacations here in Rehoboth. When you strolled the boardwalk this morning, did you happen to venture to the south end? If so, you might have noticed two streets there, one named Rodney and the other Laurel. Please understand that we've been waiting a long time to meet you both. Rod was speechless. Laurel began to weep. Rusty grinned. You were the first Celestials